Okay, fossils, evidence for past life. So we have talked about how all the rock strata and all those geologic events are preserved in the rock record, but also embedded within there are the fossils. And we've talked before how we see transitions in the record of life here on Earth, where certain species are revealed to go completely extinct before other species are revealed. For example, we never find dinosaur bones mixed with the bones of humans, mammoths, modern birds, or any other type of modern mammal, because of course the dinosaurs went extinct before they ever showed up. And we also see how life began in the water and gradually worked its way to land. So all kinds of living things have lived on this earth, all kinds of different living things. 99.9% of all the species that have existed on Earth are now extinct. So you look at all the different kinds of plants and animals that are alive today, and there are huge numbers of them. But in reality, for every one species alive today, maybe 1,000 others from the past have gone extinct already. And who knows in the future what kinds of life forms there will be. So extinct just means an organism doesn't exist. Easy. And fossils are the remains or traces of an organism. So there are some fossils which aren't a piece of the body of the organism, but like a footprint or something like that. There's a big diversity of fossils. So what we have here are, these are stromatolites. You can find stromatolites today only in a few locations, and they look like maybe an igneous rock formation or what's called pillow lava maybe, but actually they're deposits made by bacteria. What we can't see is that on the very top surface of this mound, there's like a gooey film of just biologic material, organic material. And it's bacteria. They're called cyanobacteria. They photosynthesize, they make oxygen. Now, as they absorb minerals and nutrients in the water, they take what they don't use and they deposit it, and that becomes this stonework here. It's really close to the way coral reefs are built, which we talked about yesterday. If you cut into a stromatolite, this is what you see. So clearly, there are layers built up one after the other. And these are like tree rings. We can go through and kind of count how many layers there are. Stromatolites are the oldest fossils you can find on Earth. There are stromatolite fossils that are more than 3.5 billion years old. That is an incredibly long, very long period of time. You'll find those fossils in Australia if you want to look them up. Stromatolites are formed by bacteria. That's pretty obviously the most simple kind of organism that we have on planet Earth. Then we start finding things like sponges. So this is a sea sponge, very, very old. That's an animal that doesn't really have body parts. It's just a colony of cells, if you want to call it that. But we're going to start growing more and more complex. Then we get corals. Corals are very simple. If you look at the anatomy of a coral polyp, they just have tentacle arms and a mouth and a digestive system. That's it. They have no eyes, they can't see, they cannot hear, they do not taste. They just simply absorb nutrients around their environment. Then we get more of the echinoderms, the animals with radial symmetry. Here's a type of starfish. These, I'm not actually sure what those are. They might be a type of starfish as well. Not all starfish have 5 arms. Some have more than 20, for example. Speaking of animals that are extinct and all the different thousands of varieties, this creature, I cannot remember what it's called, I'm sorry, but it's like a walking stick, but it lived only in the water for a long time. Life only moved on to land around 300 million years ago, whereas multicelled organisms like this have been around for about twice as long as that. So these are just some examples of really weird creatures. Here's the trilobite. We've seen that a million times. This is the oldest vertebrate that we know of. This is a tiny little fish about the size of your thumb. Again, I can't remember the name. but right here is its spine, or we would have probably called this what's called a notochord, which is sort of like the precursor to the spinal column. So this creature is the oldest fossil we have as an example of a vertebrate. And of course, all mammals and birds and reptiles and amphibians and fish today are vertebrates. I won't play this link today, but this shows kind of a fossil transition. Here's another one of those really weird creatures. Now, this guy is obviously a predator. He's got some hardware here for grabbing up prey. We can see that right here. But that's not what makes him deadly. What really makes him deadly are these things right here. These are some of the oldest eyes that we know of. Now, they look like dragonfly eyes. It's a compound type eye. That was a brand new thing for this time period. If you have eyes, think of the advantage you have if everyone else is blind. Now, this isn't a very good eye. It would not be able to see, how many fingers am I holding up or anything like that. But keep in mind, the vast majority of other organisms at this time had no kind of eyesight whatsoever. So although his vision is terrible, that is so much better than no vision at all, that this would have been the super predator back in the day. And then this thing's just kind of interesting. That's not his mouth. It's just a grabber to bring food to the mouth over here. So we see this sort of evolutionary arms race. This is called Anomalocaris. So here's the eye right here. The other eye would be over here. These are kind of like arms. Think of it maybe like a praying mantis almost. You would grab it and there's a mouth under here, but no jaws. So this organism couldn't chew its food. He maybe just had some plates, some bony plates in there that he could maybe grind up the food a little bit and eat them. And he's got all these swimmerettes, we can call them. So kind of a strange creature. And this is around 400 million years old. Now this animal's not a predator. This is prey. This is a cephalaspid, a very old, very, very old type of fish, and an armored fish. So this is, like I said, the evolutionary arms race. The predators start developing features, so the prey start developing features to protect themselves. Now if you look at this guy, he looks a lot like a fish, but there are some key differences. One, the eyes on the top of the head, we do not see that very much. Second of all, armored fish are extremely rare today, but in the past they would have been much more common. If we look at the fin here, do you see how this is not a fin like a typical fish? A typical fish that you see, their fins look like this dorsal fin over here, or like this membrane over here. This is more of a muscular kind of stump, we would call that. It's a lobe. Today there are lobe-finned fishes like a coelacanth. You can look those up. But these are not the modern type of, the fish today, most of them are called ray-finned because their fins, well, they look like a ray. You can look that up. Also, if you look at the tail, you can see the bony part of the tail extends quite far. Today we don't see that with animals. This will basically be cut off and they'll have a giant fan-shaped tail fin there. If you look up any kind of fish, that's what you will see. Apart from one group of fish, the sharks and the rays. Sharks and rays are the oldest fish on our planet. They are very distantly related to the other types of bony ray-finned fish. And sharks, obviously, they have fins, and they have tail fins and pectoral fins and whatever these are called, pelvic or pectoral fins. But if you think of a perch or a walleye, they have the ray-shaped one, whereas a shark has sort of a solid piece for its fin, both in the back, on the top, and on the bottom. Okay, moving on. This is a Brontoscorpio, a water scorpion. These could be huge. Some of these were 9 to 12 feet long, so kind of terrifying. Life started to move on land after that, so during the Carboniferous period where it was very warm on Earth and there was lots of oxygen, insects could get huge. This is a model of how big one of these dragonflies would be. Now today dragonflies are really tiny. They fit in the palm of your hand. But these were, up to 1 meter across for their wingspan. The only reason that we believe they could get that big is because there was way more oxygen in the air. So the more oxygen you have, the more fuel you have for chemical reactions, and therefore the bigger you can get. Here's a centipede. We have found fossilized centipedes that are almost 10 feet long. So most of you, that probably makes you really uncomfortable. Luckily today, these are all extinct. There is not enough oxygen in the air for these creatures to exist. Here's just a turtle. So we're familiar with turtles. Some of the fossils you find look like creatures that are still around today, but those are pretty rare. Horseshoe crabs would be another one. So here's, and we've looked at this before, here's a turtle that nobody recognizes because they're extinct. Much like the centipede, there were centipedes in the past, there were turtles in the past, but different kinds of them. This one obviously is gigantic. Here is what's called a glyptodon. I think that they have these in the Ice Age movies, which I don't watch because, well, I'm too old for that. It was a mammal, an armored mammal. We have armored mammals today, the armadillo. Another fantastic example of an armored mammal is what's called a pangolin. Look that up, they're awesome creatures. Now, it's similar, but these glyptodons were huge. I mean, they're the size of old like Fiat 500s or Volkswagen Beetles from like the 60s or 70s. Here's a horseshoe crab. Like I told you, some creatures are living fossils. Why has the horseshoe crab continued to be on Earth for 400 million years, whereas the dinosaurs went extinct? That's a good question. I don't know the answer. Somebody probably does. This is a really important fossil. This is called Tiktaalik. Good luck trying to spell that. But here's the subject of, I'm going to go in front of the camera here. This book right here, Your Inner Fish. I've talked about this book a little bit. This fossil was found by a guy who's a professor at the University of Chicago. His name is Neil Shubin. And it's the first ever tetrapod. What the heck is a tetrapod? A tetrapod is any animal that walks on land. So here's Tiktaalik. If you look at him, he looks kind of like a crocodile, but he looks kind of like a salamander, but he also looks kind of like a fish. He's a transition fossil. So if you look at his head, it looks like a crocodile or an amphibian, not really like a fish. But he's got a giant tail fin here. Modern amphibians don't have this. Or if they do, they only have it during like their tadpole stage. He also has fins on his, what we could maybe call arms or legs. But you can see in his skeleton, he has arm bones, just with fins at the end of them. Now fish today don't have that, except for the coelacanth, which is a really rare example. So here's an animal that we have its bones from before Tiktaalik. It's pretty weird looking for a fish, but it's pretty clearly a kind of fish. Here's one from, actually not that much different, only 15 million years after Tiktaalik. And this looks like any kind of salamander, something you would see today. It is a little different. Salamanders do not quite look like that. Look at all the fingers it has, like 10 on each hand, for example. But Tiktaalik this is when I say the fossil record is the best evidence for evolution. We have a creature here who, there are no organisms that look like Tiktaalik today. But this guy was the branch from the water to the land. He would not have lived entirely on land. He breathed air, obviously, but he would have lived a long time in the water too. Here's a Dimetrodon. It looks like a dinosaur, but it's not. It's from before that. And then here's a skeleton of a Dimetrodon. Here's what's called a Postosuchus. This looks like a miniature T-Rex maybe, but again, this isn't actually a dinosaur. It's a reptile, but it's before the dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are a very special group of reptiles. Here's a Gorgonopsid, I believe is how you pronounce that. This was a herbivore. It looks like a bullfrog mixed with a bulldog mixed with like a cow. Kind of a weird looking creature. Now we have dinosaurs. Maybe someday I'll tell you the difference between dinosaurs and these things. Not today though. So this is Allosaurus, which is way before T-Rex, and this is Stegosaurus. What's really funny about Stegosaurus and T-Rex is not all dinosaurs lived at the same time. Now, we don't think about that, but the dinosaurs were on Earth for an incredibly long period of time. There were dinosaurs that lived and went extinct in different time periods than other dinosaurs. So for example, Stegosaurus did not live at the same time as Tyrannosaurus Rex. In fact, by the gap in time from when Stegosaurus went extinct to when Tyrannosaurus Rex showed up is actually a longer period of time between when Tyrannosaurus Rex went extinct 66 million years ago and today. So that just tells you how long that these dinosaurs were on Earth. A really, really, really long period of time. Here's what's called a sauropod. This is Diplodocus, 110 feet long. I took this picture actually in Denver. They have an amazing museum. That's actually where I took this picture as well. So if you're ever in Denver, go to the Museum of Science and Natural History. It's unbelievable. This is in Germany, I believe. I can't remember the name of this dinosaur. It looks like another one called Brachiosaurus, but this is not. It's different. But it's about 40 feet tall, just huge. And this is Spinosaurus aegypticus. If you've seen Jurassic Park 3, they have a Spinosaurus in that movie, but they changed it. We don't actually know that much about Spinosaurus because we only ever had one skeleton of it, and it got destroyed, I think, during World War II. It was held in a museum, and the museum got bombed because bomb technology in World War II wasn't very good, and they destroyed it. But we found some of the bones, and we looked at photographs and drawings from books, and they reconstructed it in this pretty cool show on Nova. And so this is what it would have looked like. Really the only difference is its legs are way smaller than you would think. So this is an animal that probably walked on all four legs most of the time. The one in the movie, they gave it really big rear legs so it would walk like a T-Rex. And really they only did that because it would look cooler. So nobody wants to watch a movie where this guy crawls around. This is Therizinosaurus. It was an herbivore, but it was huge. It was almost 6 meters tall. That's more than 26 feet tall. It had a pot belly. It had a beak. And look at the claws that this thing had. Each of those claws is like a meter long almost. So just a really strange looking creature. And that's maybe what it would have looked like. Obviously we don't know. Here's Pentaceratops. I'm just gonna flip through these. Woolly mammoth, they're extinct now. That's how big a modern day elephant is. Or no, sorry, that's an Asian elephant. You can't see the African elephant, but its head ends about right there. The Colombian mammoth, which was the largest mammoth ever, they were truly just gigantic. They were huge, huge animals. They were much bigger than elephants are today. This is an extinct pig called an entelodont. Its head is about 3 to 4 feet long. They have a replica of this at that Denver museum. This guy is bigger than a horse, like a Clydesdale horse, the huge ones from the Budweiser commercials. Okay, so back to fossils. Sorry. The most common type of fossil is a petrified fossil. So the way something becomes fossilized is wood and bone is porous. It's full of holes. If you pick up a chunk of wood, it's really lightweight because it's mostly just air inside of there. Same with bones. It's really surprising how light bones are. You probably remember that I have that human foot, and if you've held it, it doesn't weigh hardly anything. What happens is, if you have a fossil, you don't actually have any of the animal left. Instead, water that's super rich with minerals leaks into all the little pore spaces in the wood or bone, and then it just turns into sedimentary rock. And all that organic stuff that makes up the bone or the wood tissue, that just simply disappears over time. But a casting that filled in the gaps there is left, and that's what the fossil is. So petrified fossils are the most common. Here's just a giant chunk of petrified wood. And here's what wood tissue looks like under a microscope. Bone tissue looks almost just like that. So the water and minerals leak into that space and then they harden. So if you pick up a piece of petrified wood, it's really incredibly heavy because there aren't any of these holes left anymore. They're all filled in with minerals. Here's a fish, and then that's what bone tissue looks like under a microscope. So you can imagine water and minerals get into all those gaps there. All right, another type of fossil are the mold and casts. This is what we get with shells. So basically all the shells that you looked at yesterday on the table, a shell is really hard and really solid. It doesn't have very big gaps in it. But when a shell gets buried, the mud that surrounds the shell leaves a gap inside that mud. So then eventually the shell dissolves away and you have this open pit inside of the mud. When mud turns into rock, we call it shale. So shale is, you can find lots of fossils in shale rock. So the shell dissolves away and the cavity it leaves behind fills with minerals and stone. So a mold is like the impression. Think of a mold like a footprint. It's in the shape of the bottom of the foot, but it's just an indentation. A cast basically looks exactly like the original thing. So if we look at this one right here, this is a cast. It's three-dimensional and it sticks out just like the shell would. This is the mold. This is the impression that it gives in the mud. Here's a bunch of shell molds, here's another shell mold, and there's a cast over there and a mold over there. All right, carbon films. When you think of fossils, you probably think of bones, because that's what we have in our museums. Now, in order for something to become fossilized, it's pretty important that it is made of hard things like bone or shell or wood, because that gets preserved. How the heck do we get a fossilized insect or jellyfish if they have no bone? Well, what these guys do is they get squashed between sedimentary rock layers, and they don't leave really an impression, but the carbon that makes up their body stays behind. Our bodies don't have a ton of carbon in them, but they have enough to leave a faint outline of our body. If you've ever seen a crime scene, well, hopefully you've never seen a real crime scene, but on TV, when they do like a chalk outline of a body, that's like what a carbon film is. So these are, this is a piece of a leaf, this is a fish, which does have hard parts. But if you would look at this, if you could actually see this fossil here, and I have one that looks like this, it's not three-dimensional. It's basically like somebody drew it onto the stone. So the only thing that's preserved here is the carbon that was in its bones and tissues and things like that. And the carbon just gets imprinted into the rock. What helps you know that this is a carbon film and not just a regular fossil also is if all we had were the bones preserved, then we wouldn't be able to see its body outline. See how we can see that really clearly? You can actually, if you look closely here where my laser is, you can see the shape of the scales too. So because we have all the gaps in between, that's from the carbon that made up the fish's skin and organs and all that stuff still left in there. Here are some insects and leaves and an octopus down here. So this is just a bumblebee. And like I said, these all look like drawings almost. So it's just filled in with carbon. That's like a cicada or something, I'm not sure. This is what looks like a maple leaf. This is a ginkgo leaf. That's a tarantula, or no, it's not. I don't know what this is. It only has 6 legs, so it's not a spider. Here's a dragonfly, here's an octopus. These types of fossils are not as common, I don't believe, as the others, because it's kind of hard to preserve something when it has no bones. Now, preserved remains, what I've been saying so far is when you have a fossil, you don't have anything left over from the organism. You just have like its outline or a casting in the shape of it. But preserved remains means we do have the organism. This only happens, sorry, I went too far. This only happens with organisms that get frozen in ice or trapped in amber. Amber is the yellow stuff. It's tree sap. So insects, we find insects inside of amber. Recently, I think maybe it was last year, earlier this year, they found almost an entire baby bird trapped inside of amber, but that bird is from the time of the dinosaurs. So that's really, really exciting. Unfortunately, it's not like the amber is crystal clear and you can see the bird perfectly. You can look this up online and look at the story. You're gonna look at it and you're not gonna be able to tell where the bird is. They use really high-powered MRI machines and stuff like that to take a look. So this almost looks fake, but it's not. This is an actual baby mammoth that was found in somewhere in Russia, in Siberia, the really cold part. Look at how serious this guy's face is right here. My name is Vladimir. Whatever. And then an Asian guy for some reason. Anyway, here's the mammoth. A lot of his hair is still there. You can actually go online and buy mammoth hair. It's kind of expensive, but you can have hair from something that died tens of thousands of years ago. So this mammoth, all of the water in his body has basically dried out, but all of his organs and bones and skin are there, which is exciting. We can cut into this guy, look inside the content of his stomach, see what it was eating. Really cool stuff. We've actually been able to grab plants that are extinct perhaps now out of the stomach contents of these animals. This is not the same one, it's a different one, but again, it's a baby mammoth that was found frozen. This is Ötzi. Ötzi obviously is a person. He was found in the Swiss Alps in 1991, the year I was born, and Ötzi is 5,300 years old. He's from the Bronze Age. He's older than the pyramids in Egypt. He's just incredibly valuable as a specimen. Actually, he might be the same age as the pyramids. I can't remember. You'll need to look that up. And he was found totally on accident. So all of his skin is intact. He's totally dried out. All of the water in his body is gone. You are 70% water, and it makes up most of your weight. If we could weigh your skeleton, it only weighs a few pounds. Very, very lightweight. His muscle tissue is still there, but the water in his muscle tissue is all gone. So Ötzi's whole body probably only weighs like maybe 30 pounds. I'm not sure exactly, that's a guess. Now Ötzi, we have learned so much information from him. He's the oldest natural mummy ever found. We have mummies that were preserved intentionally, perhaps in Egypt, or look up the mummies from Peru. Now those mummies are kind of frightening. Their faces can just be kind of strange, so you've been warned. But look up the mummies of Peru. But Ötzi's the oldest human specimen found just preserved in nature. And we found many dozens of tattoos on his body. We've opened up his stomach and we found what he had to eat. There were kinds of berries in there. We found meat from an ibex, which is kind of like an antelope inside of him. He had, I don't think I have any pictures of it, but he had lots of tools with him. He had a copper axe, he had a bow and arrow, he had a bow, and he had several arrows. He had clothing, he had shoes made out of woven grass and things like that. All kinds of riches were found with him. We have also MRI'd his body and found that he had arthritis, really bad arthritis. Now 5,300 years ago, you made your living by either farming or hunting or maybe being a craftsman. So people did nothing but work. Nobody went to school. Nobody knew how to read or write. Everything was just told by oral tradition. So, and people, like I said, didn't go to school, obviously. So all you did all day was work. Work, 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 work. Now I know you guys maybe sometimes think that school is a lot of work or school sucks or whatever, but you can imagine living in a time where you had to grow your own food every day. You had to harvest your own crops every day. If you wanted new clothes, you had to make them, which means you had to hunt down an animal and skin it and preserve it and sew it together and do all that kind of stuff. Or if you wanted a house to live in, you had to build the house yourself, which means you have to go chop down your own trees, and do all that kind of stuff. Now today, we don't live in that kind of world, so it's not as bad as you think, I promise. Again, these are all preserved remains. Here are some insects in amber. Well, that's not an insect, that's an arthropod. Spider. And scorpions aren't insects either. Sorry, they're arthropods as well. And here's some sort of fly or whatever in the amber. I don't have a picture of that bird because this PowerPoint's a couple years old and that bird was just found last year. But look it up and you'll see. The amber is not clear like this stuff is. Don't try to buy these on the internet because people fake them all the time. They just use yellow plastic. Okay, lastly, trace fossils. So this is not the organism itself, but it's something it left behind. We have footprints, and we have what are called coprolites, which is fossilized poop. Seems kind of weird, but we can actually learn stuff from fossilized poop because we can see leaf material or bone fragments inside of the poop. So these are some fossilized dinosaur footprints. You can find these in a few places on Earth. I've seen them before. They're pretty cool. And these are some turds. They look like turds, but they're hard as a rock. They don't smell. There's no poop left over. It's all just minerals. All right. Now we have lots of fossils, but maybe only 1 out of a million organisms turns into a fossil. Probably not even that many, but we'll just say 1 in a million. Now, in order for something to become a fossil, it needs to die in a certain way. So most things are eaten and they don't become fossils. Or if they die, they simply fall down to the ground and their bones are just weathered and eroded away or carried away or whatever. And another thing is the vast majority of fossils are marine fossils, something from the water. Now, why the heck is that? Well, it turns out the conditions that allow for fossilization to occur are really good in the water and really bad on land. So organisms, no, this doesn't say the only way to become a fossil. It just says the best case scenario is that you're buried very quickly so that your body cannot be decomposed and weathered away or eaten, and to have hard parts like shells or bones. So in a lake, in a river, in an ocean, the bottom is full of thick mud and things like that. So when things die and fall to the bottom of a lake or a river or a stream or an ocean, there's a much better chance that it's going to be preserved because it gets buried and is protected from decomposition, rapid decomposition, I guess I should say. And bones and shells can remain in place for a long time, whereas those soft-bodied critters, that does not happen. So those are much more favorable to be fossilized. Whoops. Of course this has to happen today. Okay, we're back. So here's just an example of kind of how something becomes a fossil and then later we dig it up. Here's just kind of a cartoon. So on the left, those are the ideal conditions. Dies, gets buried in dirt, mud or whatever, and then preserved. But what you see on the right is the case for most things. So it's Dr. Seuss looking green fish, blue fish, white fish, whatever. Yeah, that's what happens most of the time. All right, so this is a geologic principle, like the laws of superposition, original horizontality, and what was the other one? Cross-cutting relationships. I forgot what the other one was. This just states that when we look at the fossil record, we can see that we go from certain organisms are in the rock layers and then they disappear because they go extinct. So when you look at really old fossil layers, you don't find horses or humans or ostriches, because they haven't always been on Earth. So when you look at rock layers that are 100 million years old, guess what? There are none of those. You don't find them in layers that are 50 million years old either. We're all fairly recent here. So this just means certain organisms never lived at the same time, like Stegosaurus and T-Rex, or like T-Rex and the woolly mammoth, or whatever it is. And we can see this in the fossil record. Like I've told you before, even before we could tell what year the dinosaurs lived in, we could tell that dinosaurs and other animals never lived together at the same time. It's totally clear by the fossil record. We have the old layers of rock deeper down, the newer layers on top. In some places, like in the Badlands of South Dakota, you can find very rarely dinosaur bones, but you find a lot more mammal bones. But you will never find the mammal bones in the same layers as the dinosaur bones, or I should actually say seashell, because South Dakota was actually underwater when the dinosaurs were around. So, but again, we never ever find those things together, not just here, but nowhere on Earth has it ever happened. And we have literally billions of fossils. So it's definitely the case. Another thing is, if you're digging in a rock layer and you have no idea how old it is, but you find a dinosaur bone, aha, I know that this layer is of a certain age. I know it's not 10 million years old, because dinosaurs went extinct way before 10 million years ago. I also know that, if I have a dinosaur bone like right here, I know it's not a billion years old, because there weren't any dinosaurs a billion years ago. Pretty much none of these things were around a billion years ago. That was a really long time ago. Okay, so I hope you guys kind of understand how evolution and natural selection works. I'll probably talk about it when I get back. But Darwin's theory of evolution through natural selection basically just tells us that certain species come and go, they go extinct, and that they change over time. We have very good transition fossils for humans that go back. If you look at like Homo erectus fossils that are close to 1 million years old, they look very much like humans, but there are some definite, really clear differences between them. But it's not a type of monkey or anything. It's a different species of human from a very long time ago. So there's our definition of natural selection. It's a process where better adapted organisms survive and reproduce more often, less adapted ones go extinct. So that asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, dinosaurs dominated the planet. It killed, 3/4 of all the species on Earth, but it didn't kill all of them. Mammals and birds were alive when there were dinosaurs way back then. Now, for whatever reason, mammals and birds, when that asteroid hit and the Earth was plunged into horrible conditions, mammals and birds had the ability to survive that. The dinosaurs didn't. Why is that? There are probably lots and lots of reasons. I don't want to get into them right now, but that's just simply all it means. So, like I've said, the fossil record is the best evidence of evolution, that and molecular biology, looking at DNA. Now, I will use this fossil to show you that. This is the most famous fossil ever found. It's called Archaeopteryx, which means like ancient bird or something like that. This is one of the oldest birds we've ever found, but there are certain things about it. That are very clearly just like birds, but there are other things that are definitely not birds. One of the first things we can see is the feathers. We call that plumage. So this definitely has to be a bird. What other organisms have feathers? Actually, as it turns out, we think lots of dinosaurs had feathers, but they weren't birds. There's a difference. Now let's zoom in on this fossil and I can tell you what I mean. Look at the face. Now, I'll tell you in a little bit, but look at it and think in your head, what is different about the skull on this as opposed to birds today? The difference is this thing has teeth. Birds don't have teeth. You can sit there and try to think of a bird with teeth, but they don't. None of them have that. This animal also, it's not very clear, but this animal doesn't have a beak. It has a jaw like a reptile does. All birds today have a beak. It's like a bony plate or whatever that forms its mouth. This animal doesn't. It has a regular mouth with teeth. Here are the feathers, but, so this is the wing or the arm of the animal. So you can hit pause or whatever and try to find what's the difference here between modern birds and this one. The difference is right here. This creature has claws on its hand. Now, of course, all birds have claws on their feet, but the only birds that have claws on their hand today are ostriches and cassowaries and emus, I think. I know for sure ostriches do. You know, a robin or a pheasant or an eagle or any other bird you can imagine. There are only 2 or 3 birds that have claws on their hands. And I don't know how many other kinds of birds there are, but probably like 20,000 or something like that, a huge number. Look it up. None of them have that anymore. They still have feathers, obviously, and this creature has feathers, but it has claws on its hand. The last thing is the hip. So this is a penguin. So look at the penguin's hip. Actually, we'll look at it up here. Your hip is made of 3 bones. One's called your ilium, which is up here. The other's called your ischium, which is down here. And then this weird bone that goes across the bottom here is called the pubis. Now, you have those same 3 bones too, but they're shaped different. Now, all birds have a hip that looks like this. Basically, it's flattened out. This is Velociraptor over here. Now, his hip, here's the ilium on top right there. This is the ischium right there. And this weird thing that sticks way down here, that's the pubis bone. So this is called a theropod dinosaur. The dinosaurs that walked on 2 legs and were carnivorous like T-Rex and Velociraptor were theropods. They all have a hip that looks like that with the weird bone that sticks way down in there. Now, let's look at Archaeopteryx. Well, lo and behold, it has the ilium across, there's the ischium, but it has that pubis bone just like Velociraptor. So this organism has the face of a Velociraptor, the claws of a Velociraptor, and the hip bone of a Velociraptor. And one other thing, it has a big long tail. Now, birds have tails, but birds do not have tail bones, or they don't have long tail bones. Here's the penguin tail bone. Now you think of a peacock or an eagle, they have really long tails, but the tail is comprised entirely of feathers. Archaeopteryx had feathers on its tail, but it has a very long tail bone. Look at that. That's a lizard tailbone, just like Velociraptor had a really long tail. So there's one in the tail, the hip, the arm, or the hand, and the face. Those are 4 features that are not like birds today, but this creature could fly. Maybe not very well, but it could kind of fly. I thought I had a picture of what we thought it looked like. But there we go. So here's another organism, just like Tiktaalik, where it's in between 2 different kinds of animals. It's very much like a dinosaur, but it's also very much like a bird. Today, all of the birds are like birds. And when the dinosaurs were around, all the dinosaurs were just like dinosaurs. This is the transition between them. So an important definition that you need to memorize is index fossils. And those are fossils that are widespread, very common. So they're common, and we find them on most or all continents. and they're only limited to a narrow section of the rock layers. So the way this works is, if you don't know how old the rock layer you're digging in is, look for a fossil. If you find a trilobite, trilobites, like I said, were very successful. You find trilobite fossils on every continent. Sorry, that was the bell. You find trilobites on every continent, and so if you find trilobite fossils, you know about how old the rock layer you're digging in is. Similarly, if you find dinosaur bones, you know, oh, well, it turns out this rock layer is between 60 and 100 million years old, or whatever. That's what we use index fossils for. And lastly, with correlation, like I talked about yesterday, you could have a rock layer like in South Dakota that has a whole bunch of fossils, but maybe there's a gap in there where we have the rock layer from 20 million years ago and we have the rock layer from 50 million years ago, but we don't have anything in between. So we go to another part of the world where we have the 30 million and the 40 million year old rock layers, and we find additional fossils in there. So that's how we put together the puzzle of life on Earth. What we have here is, you can see, so we have rock layer A right here and rock layer B right here. Now these arrows indicate, these vertical arrows indicate how long that organism has been around. So for example, dinosaurs are extinct, so they don't continue up here. And also, dinosaurs haven't always been around, so they're not down there. So we can see that the T-Rex skull does not overlap with the trilobite. Trilobites were on Earth before the dinosaurs, but they also went extinct before the dinosaurs ever showed up. So in rock B, you could hypothetically find all these fossils over here. Notice how there isn't a dinosaur bone. In rock layer A, you could hypothetically find all these fossils, but again, no trilobite bone over there. Now other things like starfish and the brachiopods and these clams or whatever that is, those both showed up on Earth a very long time ago and still exist. So we will find them in two different layers. The number of organisms that are that old, that can be found for that long, those are much more rare. There are not very many examples. We've talked about this a lot before, so be sure to jot this down. If you find corals on dry land, it means the area was once underwater. If you find tropical fossils, like from a palm tree in Alaska, it means Alaska used to be somewhere else. So that's what we use that for. The end.